Welcome to the second lesson of the Sustainability Unit. So I'm going to share my screen, start with presentation. So in this lesson, we are going to understand in which context the sustainability needs to be put and what are the reasons for urgent action, with a special focus on climate change and biodiversity. So the content of this lesson is the following. So by the end of the lesson, you will know about the 9 planetary boundaries and what is the meaning of resilience, what are resilient systems, the concept of ecosystem service, why climate change and biodiversity loss appear on the agenda of most governments, and the impact of global trends on the triple bottom line, i.e. the 3 pillars of sustainability, and the need to transition to sustainable practices. So the planetary boundaries, it's a scientific concept that has been then translated into a framework. Now, if we look at the variation of temperatures and of climate throughout the millennia and eras, basically we see that since the last ice age, the temperatures on the Earth have been pretty stable. And so we are in the era called the Holocene, where because of this stable condition, human society could grow and flourish to arrive to the establishment of the ancient civilization through to our modern civilization. However, to continue to enjoy these stable conditions that have allowed us to arrive where we are, we need to be aware that there are boundaries that need to be kept. And if these are kept within certain values, then the conditions in the planet remain stable. However, if these boundaries are breached, we are going into unknown territory, and the scientific community has warned us of that. So the 9 planetary boundaries are climate change. So climate change really related to the concentration of greenhouses and their effect on the temperature, so on rising temperature on the planet. Biosphere integrity or biodiversity loss relates with the abundance of species on Earth, and therefore relates to the health and the diversity of ecosystems. Now, health and diversity are very strictly correlated. A healthy ecosystem is very biodiverse when the amount of species and diversity within the species are reduced. Also, the resilience of the ecosystem is reduced. Land system change, this refers to how land is used by humans, and in particular, the conversion of land from natural ecosystem into land for agriculture, cities, industry. For sure, the conversion of land from biodiverse forest into other human-related uses have affected biodiversity and the water cycle. Biogeochemical flows related to nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, in particular, they are affected by human agriculture, especially the agriculture of the last 50 years, which is have industrialized with the use of a large amount of fertilizers, which contain phosphorus and nitrogen. So therefore, the content within the soil has been altered, and these elements have also gone into the rivers and water bodies, producing eutrophication and other pollution effects. Freshwater use. This boundary relates with the amount of fresh water that humans withdraw from the environment. Although there's a lot of water on the planet, the amount of fresh water is very little, is about 1% of the total amount of water. So it's a very precious resource. And when we draw water from rivers, lakes, and groundwater, if we do it in an unsustainable way, then we impoverish that area of this precious resource. Ocean acidification, as the amount of CO2 increases in the atmosphere, that also exchanges the changes the amount of CO2 that is soluble in the water, and therefore CO2 enters the ocean and produces an acidic effect because it forms an acid compound within the water. The pH level drops, and this weakens the marine ecosystem, affecting in particular shell, the shell and skeleton of marine organism, and producing the effect of on coral reef, that is the bleaching of coral reef, and which correspond to the death of these animals, the corals. Atmospheric aerosol loading relates to the particles that are released into the atmosphere by human activity, like industry or burning of substances. And high level of these microparticles can influence climate pattern, harm the health of organisms. The stratospheric ozone depletion, this boundary is relating to the depletion of the ozone layer, and that was, so the ozone layer is shielding the Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation. This was an issue, particularly in the 80s and 90s, because of the use of gases that would interfere with the ozone layer. Now those gases have been banned, therefore the ozone layer has been re-established and is no longer a big issue. Finally, the introduction of novel entities. As human society develops and expands with its activity, and in particular with the chemical industry expanding, loads of new molecules and products have been synthetically made, especially from oil. And these synthetic chemicals and plastic are introduced, are abandoned in the environment, and we don't know exactly what is the effect longer term. We know already that there are some catastrophic effects for plastic that is floating in the ocean for all the marine flora and fauna. However, also other substances that are heavily used, like heavy metals and genetic modified organisms, we are not sure of their impact into the environment long term. Now, this is a visual representation of the planetary boundaries and the state of the planetary boundaries in 2025. As you can see, out of 9, 7 planetary boundaries have already reached the safe operating space, with the last being ocean acidification that has now completely that has now reached the boundary itself, and is aiming to expand into the high risk zone. Now, the darker is the red and the higher is the risk for that specific boundary, and some boundaries are really grayed out because we are not 100% sure of their effects on the Earth ecosystem. Now, when we are looking at boundaries, we also need to understand that the concept of resilience is important. The system resilience refers to the ability of natural or human system to absorb shocks and adapt to change. So a resilient system is a system that can handle disturbances while continuing to function. In environmental terms, resilience comes from diversity. So the more diverse is a population, the higher the number of species, the higher the number of difference between individuals within the same species, the higher the ability to resist change and adapt to external shock. So, for example, we can say a biodiverse forest can recover from fire better than a monoculture plantation, because in a biodiverse forest there will remain seeds of different plants, those that can grow that can grow quicker after a fire, and those that can grow a little bit slower. Those that can grow quicker will appear immediately after the fire, so there will be normally the smaller herbs or smaller shrubs, and then they prepare the soil. They will give the properties to the soil to allow bigger plants to germinate later on. If we have a monoculture plantation of a big tree, for example, those seeds remaining will not be able to recover because they don't have the correct environment to germinate and grow. So resilience matters, because if the planetary boundaries are crossed, the system is starting to lose the capacity to bounce back, the capacity to adapt to change. So when these planetary boundaries are reached, then they can reach a tipping point where they can trigger rapid and irreversible change. The tipping point is the point of not return, and therefore, once the change is implemented, then the system changes forever. So it's very important to stay within planetary boundaries, because health keeps the ecosystem stable and predictable, and is the ecosystem, as we know, so capable to support human life. So when we talk about ecosystem, I mean, the whole Earth is itself an ecosystem, but we can break down different ecosystem within the Earth ecosystem like, forests, oceans, rivers, soil, the atmosphere. And each ecosystem provides benefit to humans and organization, and these are called ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are divided in 4 categories. So you have provisioning services, regulating services, supporting services, and cultural services. Now, provisioning services has to do with the provision of goods like food, water, timber, minerals, fish, which is also food, or medicinal resources. And of course, humans and therefore businesses depends on this input to produce goods. Regulating services are the services that keep the environment stable. These regulating services are really important because on these depend the other services. So they include climate regulation, water purification, flood control, pollination, carbon storage, and disease regulation. So without these regulating services, other ecosystem services will be affected. For example, say if there are storms and floods that can affect food production. Food may be destroyed by this type of events, and the supply chain of a specific organization may be affected. Therefore, they might have shortages of goods, or they need to go for another supply chain. So different supplier face increasing costs and also delay in their services or in their production. Supporting services are the services that create the conditions for all other ecosystem services. So supporting services include soil formation, nutrient cycling, photosynthesis, and habitat creation. Now, these supporting services are really at the basis of all ecosystem services. And therefore, they are not really noticeable by businesses because they are in the background, but without their essential service, the economic conditions will rapidly deteriorate because it is important, for example, soil formation. If there is no healthy soil, then the production of food will be affected. The same for nutrient cycle photosynthesis. And habitat creation also support the land that is around, that is, for example, used for agriculture to be healthy and productive. Finally, cultural services, these are non-material, cultural services are non-material benefits. So they include recreation, spiritual value, tourism, education, aesthetic enjoyment. These are services that are produced from ecosystem for the enjoyment of human beings, and they influence how certain sectors like tourism or outdoor recreation, education perform. Of course, if there are healthy, vibrant environments, then people want to visit them, the tourism will flourish. And also human well-being depends on these cultural services, because we like taking a walk in the woods. Our mental health also improves in this kind of environments. So this is just an image to show how the supporting and regulating services are contributing to the ecosystem services in general, and more than half basically are supporting and regulating services. Therefore, the ones that are more close to economic activities that are, or anyway, human well-being, that are the cultural provisioning services, can be supported by this, can be affected by the supporting and regulating services. And of course, if an ecosystem is healthy, it can deliver, the healthier is the ecosystem, the higher the amount of services it can deliver. So what are the relationship with organization, products, and services? There is a very strong relationship, all organizations rely on ecosystem services for products, services, and human needs. And so every product ultimately traces back to nature. So either that is an agricultural product, that is, water use. We need to use the water to produce products, mineral extraction, energy, and so on. So even the digital industries depend on ecosystem services because their infrastructure require energy, the water, and climate stability. Services, human services also depend on ecosystem services. For example, logistics and transport rely on stable weather conditions. Healthcare depends on clean air, safe water. Excuse me. And insurance companies rely on predictable climate system. So ecosystem services also meet basic human needs. When these systems are damaged, of course, human health and safety are threatened. If, for example, there are shortages of food or water or shelter, of course, the health suffers. And if if society suffer this, organization can face higher costs, or can face resource shortages and also reputational risks. The relationship is circular. Organizations need healthy ecosystem to operate. And ecosystem, if they are responsibly managed and responsibly used, they will stay productive to give back to human society. So if companies ignore this link and that balance need to be maintained, then the ecosystem may not be able to support long-term business performance, and therefore there might be less resilience. Therefore, since we know that companies and organizations and ultimately human society depend so strictly from the services that ecosystem provide, tackling climate change is for sure a priority. And in particular, climate change is a top priority because it's no longer an effect that human activity has has produced, and that an effect that we will see in the future, but is an effect that we see now. We see rising temperatures, so extreme weather with droughts and high temperature, wildfires, floods, flooding, and high level of precipitation. So all these extreme weather is affecting national economies and therefore organization. So governments are already facing the cost of disaster relief, damaged infrastructure, increased healthcare pressure due to the rising temperature, to the climate changing now. Also, climate change threatens national security because when these disasters happen, and in particular the global south is more affected, when these disasters happen, people start to leave their country. If the soil becomes unproductive, they will just move to other areas where they can find, work and anyway some level of to sustain themselves. So, therefore, we can see migration. We already see migration, but also we see conflict over resources, and in particular, water has already produced so many conflict around the world because it's becoming a scarce resource. Therefore, governments already realize that failing to address climate change is affecting the economic stability, also the public safety and geopolitical security. There's also an increased pressure from global agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, and from regulators, the public, investors, because failure to address climate change is weakening the economy in the long term. On the other side, on the other hand, also biodiversity loss is equally urgent. In fact, biodiversity loss even now is perceived as a serious issue, even though it's a less visible issue compared to climate change. We already mentioned healthy ecosystems produce so many services. They support food production, water purification, soil fertility. Now, if biodiversity declines, the ecosystem is affected. And if the ecosystem is affected, and in particular becomes less biodiverse, its resilience is affected and the ecosystem is weakened. If the ecosystem becomes weaker, it might not be able to bounce back, and therefore affecting businesses in terms of their supply chain and the economy in general. So governments and organizations, they may face higher costs to provide artificial alternatives like water treatment, flood defenses, or pollination services. For example, agriculture depends on pollinator, and there has been an instance in China where loads of pollinators were disrupted by the use of pesticides, and therefore they had to pollinate their fruit trees by hand. So this increases cost, manual labor. Other examples are fisheries. If the seas are overfished, of course, then there might not be enough fish for the next season. Pharmaceutical research also depends on thousands of plants and animal species, and then when a new compound is found, normally this is produced starting from hundreds or thousands of molecules screened. Also, biodiversity increases health risk because if ecosystems are damaged, and then some viruses, for example, they may move from wild hosts, certain type of animals, to humans because they see an abundant host. So it's a good alternative, and this makes possible rising of new diseases that we didn't know before. Finally, biodiversity is vital for resilience. We said that before, that ecosystem with diverse species, the higher the number of species, the higher the resilience of the ecosystem, and the higher the health of that ecosystem that can absorb environmental shocks. So these two issues, they need to be prioritized now because, urgent action now is necessary. The window to prevent irreversible damage is becoming narrower and narrower. We need to act today because some of the effects of, for example, the CO2 concentration will continue to be seen, even though we stop now to introduce greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, because there is a lag. Process. Therefore, it is important to act now. It is necessary to act now. Reducing emission, protecting ecosystem, shifting to renewable energy to reduce emission, improving resource efficiency, again, to reduce emission. It's all important actions that we need to take. So why these two issues are now dominating the government agenda? Apart from the fact that now we can tangibly see the effect of biodiversity loss and climate change, we also need to consider that these are systemic risks, i.e., climate change or biodiversity loss, they do not affect only a specific compartment. They don't produce a risk in a specific area. These risks affect every sector because the ecosystem work in networks. So there is what is called a domino effect. So, for example, if transport is affected, then the supply chain is affected, then the provision of goods is affected, then the health of people may be affected, and if there is a flood, that it can affect the production of energy because of certain disasters or housing availability, healthcare because people may be stranded, and so on and so forth. So governments recognize that environmental breakdown can produce loads of effect, including threatening the supply chain, but also financial instability, public spending, and reduces also the possibility of future economic growth. Politicians also have the pressure of citizens that are becoming more and more aware of what climate change and biodiversity loss threats are, international organization, and the scientific community. Last but not least, the financial markets, because also the market is observing that these issues can really pose serious risk into the economic activities. And therefore, they expect that businesses and government act to create a stable and predictable climate. Therefore, it is important to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss because they are tipping point risk. Not only they are systemic risk, but also once they reach a certain threshold, the damage becomes irreversible or extremely expensive to repair, but also we go into the area of the unknown. Scientists are not able to predict what can happen beyond a certain level of damage. So global trends such as climate change, so we saw population growth, digitalization, resource scarcity, and shifting consumer expectation are reshaping how organizations operate. Because this trend affects directly the triple bottom line, which measure the performance of an organization across 3 areas: people, planet, and profit. So the impact of these global trends on planet, i.e. the environmental performance of an organization, is the most visible impact. The environmental pressure, the environmental performance of an organization is really to take into account because environmental pressure is the most visible impact of today's global trends. All the problems regarding rising greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, deforestation, water stress and pollution are pushing ecosystem past their limits. So companies are facing stricter regulations, higher compliance costs, and increased security from investors and customers. So extreme weather for sure produce effects where you can have damage infrastructure, you can have damage to logistic operation, and increase in insurance costs. As a consequence, there could be resource scarcity because if the transport of goods has been interrupted, then supply chains will suffer. So this directly affects the environmental bottom line and makes traditional business as usual an unreliable model. Therefore, organizations are expected to cut emissions, reduce waste, and adopt a circular economy practice to maintain a longer-term stability. Global trends also impact the social impact on people, the social performance. For sure, population growth and rapid urbanization strain health, housing, education system. As these global trends like climate change or population growth continue to increase, then inequality is also on the rise. And inequality for sure drives social unrest and weakens also markets. At the same time, consumers and employees expect more from companies in terms of ethics, transparency, and social responsibility. So workers look for fair pay, safe working conditions, genuine commitment to well-being, and therefore there is an eye of attention on these topics. Companies that ignore social expectations face protests or boycotts. It's very easy in the era of social media to spread the news. And therefore, if a company does not behave by respecting the triple bottom line, it could be targeted and their reputation could be affected badly. So organizations must invest more into fair labor practices, community engagement, and ethical sourcing to maintain trust amongst their customers. The impact of global trends on profit is visible because the economic performance is deeply connected to these global pressures. So if there's an environmental disaster, this will increase operational costs. New regulation, for example, increase compliance spending. And investor factor in environmental and social performance into decision making. So they want to invest in a company that is operating within the sustainability framework, because these companies are for sure more resilient than companies that act with business as usual philosophies. Therefore, why a transition towards sustainability is necessary? It is necessary because the combined pressure of global trends on all the triple bottom line dimensions makes the transition towards sustainability a strategic necessity. Sustainability helps organizations to reduce risk, cut costs, and build resilience. Therefore, using resources in a more responsible way is for sure giving to the company or to the organization an advantage compared to those who are extracting resources without caring and therefore producing environmental damages that will then be produced damage ultimately to the company itself. Therefore, government, investors, and consumers are also demanding change from organizations. And delaying this transition is a risk in increased future costs. Of course, the earlier companies move, the better they are positioned to capture new market as well. So secure investment and also build a long-term competitive advantage. Therefore, sustainability is not just an ethical choice. It's about making the business itself sustainable. Therefore, global trends are intensifying pressure across the triple bottom line, and this pressure makes the shift to sustainability almost unavoidable. We cannot longer go back and do business as usual. So, in summary, now there is an urgency to act sustainably. And the urgency has shifted from a long-term aspiration to a present-day necessity. It's necessary to act now because we see that the effects of climate change and the effects on biodiversity loss and ecological disruption. This means less healthy ecosystem. This means less resilient ecosystem. This means loss of products and services that we gain from those ecosystems. So although climate change is the most visible, and therefore it's also almost the one that is pushed on the agenda more, we need to understand that biodiversity loss is equally important and is equally urgent. Climate change is not only the most visible threat because, of course, floods and droughts or wildfires or hurricanes and the disaster they bring with them are very visible, but also is a multiplier of other risks because heat waves and droughts reduce crop yields and therefore then reduce the stability of the supply chain. So not only is climate change producing a disaster, but this disaster then also affects so many other aspects of the society and of the economy. So to conclude why urgent action is needed, the main driver is that the main driver for change is that change is happening at a speed that outpaces society's ability to adapt. It's not that the climate has never changed, climate has always changed. The problem now is the speed at which the climate is changing. It's so fast that society is not able to keep up with it. Therefore, this is no longer a theoretical risk. This is now a reality. And global scientific bodies like the IPCC consistently show that delaying actions is not only more risky, but will not just pose threat to human needs, but also threatens economic activities, which are made by humans, after all. Therefore, it's threatening economic activities, is increasing costs, and therefore, the longer the country waits, the harder and more expensive it becomes to stabilize ecological systems. Now, these are the references. I would suggest to look from the 5th to the 10th until a safe operating space for humanity, as this is dealing with the planetary boundaries. And I will please send me any questions if you have, and I will see you in the next lessons.